Research. Network. Project. International.
Erika Moret, thank you very much for accepting to do this interview, which celebrates the conclusion of your SNIS-funded project entitled When Money Can't Buy Food or Medicine, which focuses on the effects on the trade of goods such as essential medicines and essential foodstuffs on the population, for the populations in targeted countries under sanction regimes. Could you tell us briefly about the elements of your project and how it can be pertinent for those affected populations and also for the policymakers who try to address these issues?
Sure. Well, I've been working on sanctions for almost 20 years for my sins, and over the last 10 years specializing on the humanitarian implications of sanctions use. And what we saw, and through lots of earlier studies, is that there's been a lot of work that's been done in terms of trying to understand the implications of sanctions for humanitarian assistance specifically, but very little has been done in terms of research when it comes to understanding the impacts of sanctions on the trade in essential goods, that's to say medicines, medical devices, vaccines and food and so on. And so we selected 5 heavily sanctioned countries, and particularly countries that suffer from what we call private sector overcompliance and financial sector de-risking. That's when companies and banks and so on withdraw from certain heavily sanctioned countries because of compliance risks and costs and reputational concerns. And so we selected Syria, Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan and Venezuela as our case studies for the project.
And this is a project that started in a difficult moment. We were in the middle of the pandemic. And then another difficult moment came, which is the war in Ukraine. It has propelled your study in the limelight of the media, but also policymakers. But we'd like to know, how has this also impacted the research, process, maybe advocacy or outreach?
During this time, we've seen sanctions really coming under the spotlight as well. During the pandemic, it was the first time that I think it really became in the public eye, the fact that certain sanctions can have negative implications for supply chains when we see factors such as overcompliance and financial sector de-risking, because sanctions are not designed to impede access to medicines and food and other essential goods. We have humanitarian carve-outs in place under most sanctions regimes now, and there have been huge steps forward on this front since December 2021. The United Nations adopted UN Security Council 2664, which represents humanitarian carve-outs across all UN sanctions regimes in terms of their asset freezes, but also the United States has adopted general licenses, which are also humanitarian carve-outs under their autonomous or unilateral sanctions regimes. We've seen other countries following suit. So really impressive work on the part of NGOs, experts, all working together to bring to the awareness of governments the need to take action on this front. And so we've seen a lot of positive steps in recent times.
Well, this is a SNIS video about the project, so you're allowed to toot the horn of the project. So could you tell us maybe some striking results or paths to action that you could find during this project?
Well, first of all, I think the first finding is that we don't tend to see private sector actors being part of the conversations on what else could be done by policymakers. We've seen the creation of groupings in a number of countries in recent years that bring together banks, NGOs and governments to try and fix some of the problems associated with sanctions, adjust the humanitarian carve-outs and so on. But we don't tend to see other private sector actors there, for example, traders in food and medicines. And that would be a really beneficial change, in my view. Secondly, when we see the creation of humanitarian carve-outs, they're very much focused still on humanitarian assistance. Now, some have started to focus in on private sector actors, suppliers of food and medicines and so on. But again, in our view, more could be done on that front. And the third point is that this problem of overcompliance and de-risking is often more of a problem than the sanctions themselves. And so outreach by governments, clear guidance, and initiatives to make sure that the companies understand what they can and can't do and make decisions based on a sound knowledge of the risks at play, can then potentially help improve access to some of the most heavily sanctioned countries around the world so that they can continue to access food and medicines and vaccines in an unhindered way.
And are there any future developments in terms of implementation of this research?
Yeah, well, on the back of this project, we've created something called Advancing Humanitarianism Through Sanctions Reform, which we launched this year at Wilton Park in the UK. It brings together various governments, NGOs, financial sector institutions, and some private sector actors, thinking about ways that the community, the multi-stakeholder group, can try to drive forward additional areas of change. And that's really to bring together this fantastic body of scholarly work and policy recommendations in one coherent place so that those who are busy designing the sanctions and so on can be cognizant of the wealth of research that's out there and start to think about additional things that could be done as well. So we really want the research to be as constructive as possible and recognizing the fact that sanctions play a very important role in international security, tackling global challenges and breaches of international norms. Sanctions are clearly here to stay. They're really proliferating in use around the world. And so it's vital that all the different sectors come together and draw on this multidisciplinary body of work to continue the good work that's been done already and identify new areas where policy change can be brought about, but also innovation can play an interesting role through tech for good, financial technologies, digital payment platforms, for example, and so on.
Do you have any last words or any message that this project inspired you?
Well, the key that I've learned through this project is the importance of working together across academic disciplines, because this is the first project for me that we've worked with people from public health, political science, sociology, geography, economics, and so on. Not only that, but we've had to work with different sectors. So we established these big expert groups from the international NGO community, from different parts of the UN, legal scholars and so on to help advise and inform our work. And this was absolutely vital as well because it's an incredibly complex technical set of subjects and you really do need to be working together. And again, it can't just stay in the academic world. It has to be relevant to the policymakers, but also to those in business who are trying to deliver goods. And if I could give one final example as well, what we found is that this problem of over-compliance really impacts on every single aspect of supply chains of the goods that we looked at. Everything from technology, shipping, insurance, hardware, software, you name it, there were these problems of reluctance and fear to engage in heavily sanctioned jurisdictions. Sometimes it was a cost-benefit analysis. But it really does permeate across the full scale of private sector actors. And so it's really vital to engage with all of them as well and have a very comprehensive approach in doing so.
Erika Moret, thank you very much. This was a project that also us as SNIS were very excited about. We're very happy to see it concluding and continuing. And we wish you all the best for the continuing of your research.
Thank you very much. Thank you.